March 23, 1944. Berchtesgaden, Bavaria. Adolf Hitler stood before a relief map of the Atlantic coast, tracing the defensive line that stretched from Norway to the Spanish border. Field Marshal Rommel, recently appointed to inspect and strengthen these defenses, presented his assessment to the Führer and assembled staff. The Atlantic Wall is the most formidable defensive barrier ever constructed, Rommel stated, his pointer moving along the French coast. 15,000 fortifications, 500,000 obstacles on the beaches, 6 million mines, artillery positions covering every landing zone. The coast is a fortress that cannot be penetrated. Hitler nodded with satisfaction. When the invasion comes, and it will come, the enemy will be thrown back into the sea within hours. Their ships will provide naval bombardment, but our bunkers are designed to withstand anything they can deliver. Concrete walls 2 meters thick, reinforced steel doors, overhead protection against bombs. The Atlantic Wall is impregnable. What Hitler didn't know, what none of the German commanders assembled in that room could have imagined, was that in 74 days, the naval bombardment preceding the D-Day invasion would deliver more explosive force onto a 20-mile stretch of French coastline in 3 hours than the entire Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the Blitz. 7 battleships, 18 cruisers, and 43 destroyers would fire 140,000 shells weighing 10,000 tons onto fortifications designed to resist aerial bombing. And those fortifications would be reduced to rubble so thoroughly that German defenders would be unable to resist the invasion effectively. This is the story of how Hitler's impregnable Atlantic Wall was demolished in hours by the concentrated fury of Allied naval gunfire, how German engineering was overwhelmed by American and British naval power, and how the greatest coastal defense system ever built became a monument to the futility of static defense against mobile firepower. The Atlantic Wall emerged from Hitler's obsession with fortress defense and his recognition, after the failure to invade Britain, that Germany would eventually face Allied amphibious assault. In March 1942, Hitler issued Führer Directive 40, ordering the construction of permanent fortifications along the entire Atlantic and Channel coast. The concept was borrowed from France's Maginot Line, massive fortifications that would make invasion so costly that the Allies would either not attempt it or would be destroyed in the attempt. Hitler envisioned a wall of steel and concrete that would protect Fortress Europe indefinitely, allowing Germany to focus on defeating the Soviet Union while maintaining impregnable defenses in the West. The scale of construction was enormous. Organization Todt, the Nazi military engineering group, employed 260,000 workers, many of them forced laborers from occupied territories, to build fortifications. Between 1942 and 1944, they poured 17 million cubic yards of concrete, more than was used to build all pre-war German autobahns. They installed thousands of artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, machine guns, and obstacles. The fortifications ranged from massive gun batteries with 15-inch naval guns in reinforced concrete casemates to small pillboxes for machine gun positions. The larger installations featured walls up to 8 feet thick, multiple chambers connected by tunnels, ammunition storage protected by blast doors, and overhead protection designed to withstand 500-pound bombs. The beach obstacles were equally elaborate. Belgian gates, steel frameworks designed to tear the bottoms out of landing craft. Czech hedgehogs, steel rails welded into X shapes that would impale vehicles. Thousands of wooden stakes topped with mines, positioned at the tide line to destroy landing craft. Rommel personally supervised the installation of additional obstacles after his appointment as commander of Army Group B in late 1943, adding over 500,000 obstacles in 6 months. Behind the beaches, German engineers created killing zones. Artillery was pre-registered on every sector of beach. Machine gun positions were sited for interlocking fields of fire. Anti-tank ditches and walls blocked routes inland. Minefields channeled attackers into prepared fire zones. Everything was designed to maximize casualties among troops who survived the initial landing. The propaganda surrounding the Atlantic Wall was extensive. German newsreels showed massive concrete bunkers, artillery pieces firing seaward, soldiers manning impregnable positions. The message to occupied Europe and to Germany itself was clear. Invasion was impossible. The Atlantic Wall would protect the Reich. Ultimate victory was assured. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, was more skeptical. In private conversations recorded by staff officers, he described the Atlantic Wall as an enormous bluff, more for the German people than for the enemy. It is holding together a front which has already collapsed. But publicly, von Rundstedt maintained the fiction of impregnability because Hitler demanded optimism. Rommel, assigned to strengthen the defenses, understood the wall's limitations better than most. He recognized that the fortifications, while impressive, couldn't be everywhere. The coast was too long, resources were limited, and mobile reserves were inadequate to respond to breaches. His strategy was to defeat the invasion at the waterline, prevent Allied forces from establishing a beachhead by making the beaches themselves impassable killing zones. The enemy must be annihilated before he reaches our main battlefield, Rommel stated in a February 1944 conference. We must stop him in the water, not only delaying him, but destroying him. This is the one place where we have a chance. Once the enemy gets across the beach and consolidates, it will be nearly impossible to throw him back due to his air and naval superiority. But Rommel's assessment contained a critical assumption, that German fortifications could withstand the naval bombardment long enough for defenders to decimate landing forces. This assumption was based on experience with British coastal raids at Dieppe and elsewhere, where limited naval support had allowed German defenses to function effectively. What Rommel couldn't anticipate was the scale of naval gunfire the Allies would bring to bear. The Allied plan for D-Day naval gunfire support was unprecedented in scale. The bombardment force, commanded by Rear Admiral Morton Deo for the American sector and Rear Admiral Frederick Dalrymple Hamilton for the British sector, comprised 7 battleships, 2 monitors, 18 cruisers, and 43 destroyers, the largest naval bombardment force ever assembled. The firepower these ships represented was staggering. The battleships alone, USS Texas, USS Arkansas, USS Nevada, HMS Warspite, HMS Ramillies, HMS Rodney, and HMS Nelson, carried guns ranging from 12-inch to 16-inch caliber. Each 16-inch shell weighed 2,700 pounds. A single broadside from HMS Nelson's 9 16-inch guns delivered 24,300 pounds of explosive. The cruisers added 6-inch and 8-inch guns. The destroyers contributed rapid-fire 5-inch guns. American planners, learning from the Tarawa assault where insufficient naval gunfire had led to heavy casualties, allocated 90 minutes of preliminary bombardment for Utah and Omaha beaches. British planners allocated 2 hours for Gold, Juno, and Sword beaches. Every known German defensive position had been identified through aerial reconnaissance, resistance intelligence, and photo analysis. Fire plans were developed assigning specific ships to specific targets with backup assignments if primary targets were destroyed quickly. German intelligence observed the massive Allied fleet gathering in British ports, but underestimated what concentrated naval gunfire could achieve. A Wehrmacht intelligence assessment from May 1944 stated, "Enemy naval forces are substantial and will provide supporting fire during invasion attempt. However, our coastal fortifications are designed to withstand naval bombardment. Concrete casemates will protect artillery. Bunker overhead protection will defeat naval shells. Our guns will continue firing throughout enemy bombardment, engaging landing craft and inflicting heavy casualties." The assessment was based on outdated understanding of naval gunnery and fundamental misunderstanding of the weight of fire the Allies would deliver. German fortifications were designed to resist 500-pound bombs dropped from aircraft. They were not designed to resist repeated hits from 1-ton naval shells fired at nearly flat trajectories. June 6, 1944, 0550 hours. Normandy coast, France. The bombardment began as the first light of dawn illuminated the French coast. USS Texas opened fire on German positions behind Utah Beach. The 14-inch guns of the American battleship spoke with thunder that could be heard for miles. Each shell, weighing 1,500 pounds and traveling at 2,500 feet per second, delivered enough kinetic energy to penetrate 8 feet of reinforced concrete. Aboard USS Nevada, Fire Control Officer Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Frost watched through binoculars as the first salvos struck German positions. Our initial ranging shots fell short, walked up the beach in 200-yard increments until we were on target. Then we commenced fire for effect. 3 guns per turret, for turrets firing in rotation. We could maintain continuous fire, 1 salvo every 40 seconds. The German positions just disappeared. You'd see a bunker through the binoculars, then a shell hit, and when the smoke cleared, there was rubble. Not damaged, destroyed. The German defenders experienced something beyond their worst imaginations. Unteroffizier Klaus Herrig, manning a concrete bunker at Omaha Beach, later described the bombardment. It started as thunder that never stopped. The sound rolled across the beach continuously. Then the first shells hit positions near us. The entire bunker shook. Concrete dust filled the air. Men were shouting, but couldn't be heard over the noise. A shell hit our bunker, not directly near the entrance. The concussion blew the steel door off its hinges. The next shell hit directly. I don't remember anything after that. I woke up buried in concrete, deaf, bleeding from the ears. Of 12 men in my position, 4 survived. The bunker was split open like someone had hit it with a giant axe. The systematic destruction proceeded with industrial efficiency. Naval Gunfire officers, trained to engage moving ships at sea, found stationary concrete fortifications to be easy targets. Aerial spotters in Spitfires and Mustangs orbited above the beaches, radioing corrections. Target Alpha 7, bunker at grid reference, fire for effect. The shells would arrive within seconds, then the spotter would assess. Target destroyed, moving to Target Alpha 8. The weight of fire was beyond anything seen in previous amphibious operations. In the 3 hours from 0550 to 0850 hours, the Allied bombardment force fired approximately 140,000 shells ranging from 5-inch destroyer rounds to 16-inch battleship projectiles. The total weight of explosive delivered exceeded 10,000 tons, more than the Luftwaffe dropped on London during the entire Blitz. The effect on German fortifications was catastrophic. Concrete walls designed to resist bomb blast couldn't withstand direct hits from naval shells fired at nearly flat trajectories. The shells penetrated several feet into concrete before detonating, creating internal explosions that shattered reinforced structures from within. Bunkers that survived the first hits were targeted repeatedly until destroyed. The larger fortifications, built around naval guns taken from French ships captured in 1940, received special attention. The Long-Sur-Mer battery, with 4 150mm guns in reinforced casemates, was engaged by HMS Ajax. The cruiser fired 115 6-inch shells in rapid succession. The first salvos disabled 2 guns. Subsequent fire destroyed the fire control position and ammunition storage. By 0700 hours, the battery was silent, for guns that could have destroyed dozens of landing craft were reduced to rubble in 30 minutes. At Point Du Hoc, where German 155mm guns threatened both Utah and Omaha beaches, USS Texas engaged with 14-inch fire from 0600 hours. The clifftop position, considered nearly invulnerable to attack, was plastered with over 600 shells. The fortifications were systematically destroyed, the cliff face was cratered, and the entire position was rendered untenable before Army Rangers arrived to assault it. The psychological impact on surviving German defenders was profound. These were soldiers who had been assured that their positions were impregnable, that the concrete walls would protect them, that they would slaughter invaders from positions of strength. Instead, they experienced bombardment beyond any previous military engagement, watched their fortifications crumble, saw comrades buried in collapsing bunkers, and realized that the Atlantic Wall was not a fortress, but a trap. Lieutenant Gustav Keller, commanding a strong point at Gold Beach, survived the bombardment in a deep bunker and emerged after the shelling stopped. The world above was transformed. Positions I had inspected that morning were gone. Not damaged, gone. Concrete rubble and shell craters were all that remained. Men emerged from surviving positions in shock. Some were bleeding from the ears, deafened by concussion. Others were simply staring, unable to process what they had experienced. When the landing craft appeared offshore, many positions didn't fire. The guns were destroyed, the crews were dead or incapacitated, and the survivors were too shocked to fight effectively. The variation in bombardment effectiveness between beaches revealed important lessons. At Utah Beach, where the naval bombardment was most effective and lasted longest, German resistance was minimal. The 4th Infantry Division landed with relatively light casualties, secured the beach quickly, and pushed inland. At Omaha Beach, where tide conditions and targeting errors meant some German positions survived bombardment intact, American forces took heavy casualties and nearly failed to establish a beachhead. The Omaha Beach experience demonstrated both the power and limitations of naval gunfire. In the western sector, where USS Texas and USS Arkansas had systematically destroyed German positions, American troops advanced relatively quickly. In the eastern sector, where some fortified positions survived due to targeting errors and obscuration by smoke, German defenders inflicted horrific casualties. The difference between destroyed and intact positions was measured in hundreds of American lives. But even at Omaha Beach, where German resistance was strongest, the naval gunfire ultimately proved decisive. As the situation on the beach became desperate, naval observers called for fire on specific positions that were holding up the advance. Destroyers moved to within 1,000 yards of the beach, so close they were nearly grounding, to engage German bunkers with direct fire at point-blank range. The heavy guns of USS Texas and USS Arkansas were directed onto fortified positions that infantry couldn't overcome. One by one, the German strongpoints were demolished by high-explosive shells fired from distances where missing was nearly impossible. Admiral Mortondeo, commanding the bombardment force for the American beaches, later described the naval gunfire mission. "We were not trying to soften the defenses. We were trying to annihilate them. Every gun, every bunker, every fortified position was targeted for destruction, not suppression. We had the firepower to do it, the ammunition to sustain it, and the time to be thorough. The Atlantic Wall was concrete and steel. We applied high explosive and kinetic energy until the concrete was rubble and the steel was scrap." The British beaches experienced similar patterns. At Sword Beach, HMS Warspite, HMS Ramillies, and supporting cruisers demolished German positions so thoroughly that British forces advanced inland against minimal resistance. At Juno Beach, concentrated fire from Canadian destroyers and cruisers destroyed most beach defenses before the first landing craft arrived. At Gold Beach, HMS Belfast, and supporting vessels systematically eliminated German strongpoints throughout the morning. The larger strategic impact extended beyond the immediate destruction of fortifications. German reserves, positioned inland to counterattack any landing, were supposed to move to the coast once the invasion site was identified. But naval gunfire extended well inland, engaging German forces attempting to move toward the beaches. Artillery positions, troop concentrations, road junctions, and bridges were all targeted by naval guns, whose range exceeded 20 miles for battleships and 15 miles for cruisers. The 21st Panzer Division, attempting to counterattack on D-Day afternoon, was engaged by naval gunfire as it approached the coast. The division's after-action report noted, movement toward enemy positions was hindered by naval gunfire of extraordinary weight and accuracy. Artillery batteries attempting to deploy were targeted within minutes by naval shells. Tank concentrations were spotted and engaged before reaching attack positions. The division suffered significant casualties from naval gunfire before engaging enemy ground forces. The German command structure struggled to comprehend what was happening. Field Marshal Rommel, who had left France for his wife's birthday and was in Germany when the invasion began, rushed back to find his carefully prepared defenses in ruins. His first reports from the front described the Atlantic Wall's fortifications as mostly destroyed or rendered inoperable by naval bombardment. Rommel's assessment, filed on June 7th, revealed complete revision of his earlier confidence. The enemy naval gunfire is of unprecedented weight and accuracy. Our coastal fortifications, while well constructed, cannot withstand sustained bombardment from naval guns. Positions that were expected to function throughout the invasion were destroyed in the first hour. The Atlantic Wall has been penetrated not through weakness in design, but through application of firepower exceeding anything anticipated. Hitler, receiving reports from Normandy, initially refused to believe that naval gunfire alone had neutralized the Atlantic Wall. He insisted that defenders had abandoned their positions prematurely, that German forces had failed to fight with proper determination. It took days for Hitler to accept that the fortifications he had declared impregnable had been demolished by naval bombardment in a matter of hours. The ammunition expenditure revealed the scale of effort. USS Nevada fired 337 rounds of 14-inch ammunition on D-Day, more than the ship had fired in the entire Pearl Harbor battle. USS Texas fired 246 rounds of 14-inch shells. HMS Warspite fired 300 rounds of 15-inch ammunition. The destroyers, with their rapid-fire 5-inch guns, fired thousands of rounds each. The total ammunition consumption for the day exceeded what had been projected for the entire week. The logistical achievement of sustaining this bombardment was remarkable. Ammunition ships accompanied the bombardment force, allowing replenishment at sea. Destroyers that expended their ready ammunition were replaced by fresh destroyers from reserve. The fire support never stopped. As landing forces advanced inland, naval gunfire shifted to more distant targets, providing continuous artillery support for days after the initial landing. German survivors of the bombardment provided consistent testimony in post-war interrogations about the Atlantic Wall's failure. A compilation of interrogations conducted by U.S. Army historians revealed common themes. The bombardment was far heavier than expected. The concrete fortifications offered less protection than promised. The psychological effect was devastating, and organized resistance was nearly impossible after bombardment lifted. Oberst Fritz Ziegelmann, Chief of Staff of the 352nd Infantry Division defending Omaha Beach, provided detailed analysis. The naval bombardment destroyed approximately 60% of our fortified positions in the first hour. By the time the bombardment lifted and landing craft approached, our defensive capability was reduced by more than half. Positions that survived were isolated, communications were cut, and coordination was impossible. Individual strongpoints fought well, but the defensive system as a whole had been shattered before the first American soldier set foot on the beach. The Atlantic Wall's failure validated Allied planning and justified the enormous investment in amphibious warfare capability. The Americans and British had spent 2 years developing doctrine, equipment, and training for amphibious assault. They had learned from failures at Dieppe and Tarawa. They had built specialized landing craft, trained for ship-to-shore movement, and developed naval gunfire techniques, specifically for coastal bombardment. The German defenders, by contrast, had built fixed fortifications based on assumptions about defensive warfare that dated to World War I. They assumed that concrete could withstand available firepower, that defenders protected by fortifications could decimate attackers crossing open beaches, and that static defense was sufficient against amphibious assault. All of these assumptions were demolished along with the concrete bunkers on June 6th. The comparison with the Italian coastal defenses encountered during the Sicily and Salerno invasions was instructive. Italian fortifications, less elaborate than the Atlantic Wall, had been similarly demolished by naval gunfire. But German planners had dismissed the Italian experience, attributing it to Italian poor construction and unwillingness to fight. The Normandy experience proved that even the best constructed fortifications couldn't survive concentrated naval bombardment. The technological factors that enabled the Allied bombardment's effectiveness included radar fire control, which allowed accurate firing in dawn light and through smoke, aerial spotting, which corrected fire in real time, radio communications, which coordinated fire from multiple ships onto single targets, and doctrinal development that treated naval gunfire as precise artillery rather than area suppression. The German countermeasures to naval gunfire were minimal and ineffective. Coastal artillery batteries attempted to engage Allied ships, but were outranged and quickly silenced by return fire. The few German warships available stayed in port. Engaging Allied battleships and cruisers would have been suicidal. The Luftwaffe, which might have attacked the bombardment force, was largely absent due to Allied air superiority. The Atlantic Wall was supposed to be impregnable, so contingency plans for its failure were inadequate. The post-invasion analysis by German military leadership revealed bitter acknowledgement of strategic failure. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, in his post-war interrogation, stated, "The Atlantic Wall was a waste of concrete and manpower. It gave us a false sense of security and absorbed resources that should have been used for mobile reserves. The fortifications were destroyed in hours by naval gunfire. We would have been better served by flexible defense in depth rather than rigid linear defense." The Atlantic Wall's ruins remained for decades after the war, massive concrete structures too difficult to remove, slowly eroding but still visible. These ruins became monuments not to German defensive capability, but to the futility of static defense against mobile firepower. Tourists visiting Normandy beaches today can see bunkers split open by naval shells, concrete walls shattered by explosions, fortifications that were supposed to protect Fortress Europe but instead became tombs for their garrisons. The naval gunfire lesson influenced post-war military doctrine globally. The effectiveness of concentrated fire support validated amphibious assault as viable against defended coasts. The U.S. Navy institutionalized naval gunfire support doctrine that was applied in Korea, Vietnam, and later conflicts. Modern naval forces, despite emphasizing missiles and aircraft, still maintain gunfire capability because Normandy proved its value. The human cost of the Atlantic Wall's failure was borne by German soldiers who had trusted their fortifications to protect them. Of approximately 50,000 German troops manning the Atlantic Wall in the Normandy sector, over 9,000 were killed, wounded, or captured on D-Day. Many died in collapsing bunkers during the bombardment. Others were killed as they emerged from destroyed positions into the fire of advancing Allied troops. The fortifications that were supposed to protect them instead became death traps when subjected to firepower beyond anything their designers anticipated. The final assessment of the Atlantic Wall must acknowledge that the fortifications were well engineered for the threats German planners anticipated: resistance to aerial bombing, protection against infantry assault, obstacles to armored vehicles. The engineering was sound, the construction was solid, and the planning was thorough. The failure was not in execution, but in conception. The Atlantic Wall was designed to resist 1940s threats using 1930s defensive thinking against an enemy that had developed 1944 capabilities. Hitler declared the Atlantic Wall impregnable because he believed concrete and steel could resist any attack. He was wrong. The Allied bombardment force delivered 10,000 tons of high explosive in 3 hours onto fortifications designed to resist hundreds of tons over days. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Enough firepower applied to strong defenses will destroy them. The Allies had enough firepower. The Atlantic Wall, for all its concrete and steel, did not have enough strength. The ruins of bunkers along the Normandy coast, walls shattered by naval shells, rooms filled with rubble, concrete slabs cracked and displaced, stand as permanent testimony to the bombardment's effectiveness. On June 5, 1944, the Atlantic Wall was a formidable defensive barrier. On June 6, 1944, after 3 hours of naval gunfire, it was rubble. The transformation from fortress to ruins happened faster than German defenders could comprehend, faster than German commanders could respond, and faster than Hitler could accept. The naval gunfire that reduced the Atlantic Wall to rubble in 3 hours validated the Allied investment in amphibious warfare, justified the enormous fleet assembled for the invasion, and proved that the most modern form of warfare, mobile, concentrated firepower delivered with precision, would always defeat the most sophisticated static defenses. The Atlantic Wall was impregnable only until it was tested. When tested, it failed catastrophically, and the failure opened the path to France's liberation and Germany's defeat.